Hey guys, so this is AP World History, Chapter 15, India and the Indian Ocean Basin. Two really major things you need to take away from this chapter are one, the introduction of Islam and the spread of Islam into India, and not only into India, into Southeast Asia, and two, the importance that trade had on India and the Indian Ocean Basin. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the quest for centralized imperial rule starts with Guptas. A lot of nomadic pressures will end the Gupta empire, and the 16th century, the Mughals will come in and assert authority. But until then, India will really be kind of in chaos, meaning that there's not going to be any centralized rule. No one dynasty is going to come in and take over. So we're going to see northern and southern India have a lot of differences. North, you're going to be politically turbulent and tense. Again, people are vying for power, trying to get power, and it's going to be difficult to maintain when you do have it. An example of this difficulty will be Harsha. He, for a moment, created some sort of stability in northern India. A lot of people liked him. He was a good leader, very tolerant of different religions, so you could have different faiths in his empire. Very giving, very scholarly. He built hospitals, so just overall, a really good leader. But he struggled a lot to maintain power because there was no centralized rule. A lot of the times he was on horseback going from place to place just trying to enforce his rule and authority. And a lot of local rulers that he didn't make it to, they often were the ones in charge in those lands. So what ends up happening is that he will get assassinated and he will have no heir. And this will pretty much end his rule. And again, you'll just see a bunch of local regional leaders coming in to power in this area. There's no one major empire, no one major dynasty that will take over. All right, so your first question is, or statement, name three qualities that make a good leader. And why, in your opinion, are these good qualities? Then two, what made Harsha a good leader? But why couldn't he maintain control of northern India? So, since there were no real leaders in the northern part of India, we're going to see the introduction of Islam that will come into India, and it's going to come in three different ways. One of the first ways is militarily. India will be under Muslim control for a time. Especially in the northern part, especially when Sindh gets conquered militarily. The other way that Islam comes about is through merchants, both in northern and southern India. They're obviously more accepting of the religion because they're trying to make deals. They're trying to make transactions with people that they're selling their goods to. So you're going to see a lot of times merchants are going to be the ones who are probably the most accepting of different religions. And it's not necessarily because that's just the type of people they are, but it's more because they want to make that economic deal with the other person. So they create small communities and they will marry women. These merchants will begin to marry the women that are living in India. And again, remember, yes, I'm sure it's love, but probably it's not love. It's probably just for economic gain. And then the third way that Islam will come into India is through migration and invasion. The Turks will come in from Central Asia and they will establish Islam in northern India. And we see this example through Mahmud of Ghazi. He was a Turkish leader. He had several raiding expeditions that he did in India. Before that, he, had established his own small rule outside of India, and he was big time into the arts and literature. But when he came into India, it wasn't necessarily that he was there to establish himself. He wasn't there for the land, but rather he was there for the wealth. And he found that wealth in a lot of the Buddhist and Hindu temples, because remember, the Buddhist and Hindu temples at the time were not only places of worship, but they also served as social and commercial centers for the people that lived in the area. So he would destroy the Buddhist and Hindu sites and take, all the goods that were there from it. And once he destroyed them, he would build mosques on top of them. So in northern India, we also see the Sultanate of Delhi. They would establish themselves by successors of Mahmud. They would be the successors of them. And this was probably in northern India where we saw the most Islamic area. the Sultanate of Delhi. And they really could not extend their power beyond that because, again, they just didn't have the authority, they didn't have the military power to do that. And you also keep on seeing these local Indian rulers who are kind of in charge of their own small areas. So it became really difficult. It was almost like they were just kind of relying on those local rulers to do what they said, but a lot of times it didn't work. So, like I said, there's no real strength in terms of bureaucracy and administration, also. And it kind of makes them just kind of stay in that area. So, there's a huge role in establishing Islam in the Bengal region. That's really probably where they had the most success. All right, so your question is, what three ways did Islam come into India? And what was Ghazi's main purpose? And then number 5, why do you think Islam's Sultanate of Delhi was not able to expand beyond its boundaries? Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is production and trade in the Indian Ocean Basin. Of course, we're going to start with agriculture because that's really what everything starts with. Just keep in mind, if you can't have a strong agricultural system, then it's really going to be hard to move on into specialized labor, into population growth, into urbanization. So one of the ways that they were able to have a good agricultural system was through the monsoons. They depended heavily on the rainfall. In the summer, you had strong rainfall, and then that means that you would plant your crops, harvest, and then harvest for your good crops later. Also, you would have to create irrigation systems because you could not necessarily always depending on the location of where you were in India, on the water to be continually raining, because there was no water dependent on the areas that you were. It was very limited, the rainfall. So there's no natural water source, and because of that, you're going to create dams, canals, and reservoirs in order to hold your water until it's needed. But keep in mind, all of this will lead to population growth, and you see that happening in 600 CE, went from 53 million to the end, it goes to 105 million. So, trade and economic development. Most regions in India were self sufficient. Pretty much different regions had different commodities they had to offer to others. And so the commodities and specialized crops had to be traded within. So, maybe what somebody was growing in the north of India is something they didn't have in the south, and vice versa. There were hundreds of also Hindu temples that served a very important role in terms of economic development. They took care of agricultural activities. They helped to create irrigation systems. They also formed boys' schooling, so also a form of education. And of course, they were also bankers holding and lending money to, merchants and venture capitalists. So the Hindu temples are really going to be the ones to promote economic development through production and trade as well. And remember that the temples and the guilds, the ones who have these specialized labor forces, they're going to have that special relationship with each other because of the important role that the temples play. So cross-cultural trade in the Indian Ocean Basin, they have something called the Emporia. The Emporia was essentially a clearinghouse of the Indian Ocean Basin. So I guess the best way you can really kind of think of it as kind of like a flea market or a swap meet here in El Paso, and maybe mixed with like a Sam store. So it's a huge area, and it's selling all different kinds of goods that merchants from different areas are coming in and selling to each other. So they would use the Silk Roads and the sea lanes to reach these emporias. A lot of the time, it was really the sea lanes. Larger ships began to be created to withstand the monsoon winds. So, in terms of the different types of ships, you would see dhows, which were created by India, Persia, and the Arabs. These were the ships that they used to sail in and out of the Indian Ocean Basin, and then the junks were by the Chinese. So just remember that because you might see that on a test. But again, that not only did they build these large ships to withstand the wind, but they also built these large ships in order to carry large quantities of goods that they were trading and goods that they acquire through their trade. So because of these cross-cultural exchanges, you also see this creation of specialized production, meaning that people in India and around the area are seeing that, hey, this is the main center of trade. Well, I need something very special, very particular to offer these people who are coming in. And so people begin to have very, very specialized trading, like cotton. They would use it to make very nice textiles with it. You had sugar refining. You would have people who were tanning their leather. So it got to be very specific types of trading that would occur, or selling of any kind of goods that were there. So one of the kingdoms that it mentions during this Indian Ocean trade is the kingdom of Axum, and it's part of Ethiopia, which is in Africa. And it's kind of important because this is a political and economic development. And the reason it's important, not only because of that, is because it is prominently Christian. And in this whole area around the Indian Ocean basin, the main types of merchants there are Muslim. They believe in Islam. So to see this kingdom thrive as the Christian kingdom is very interesting at this time. There were attempts by Islamic empires and Islamic military to go in and take over, but Axum was able to maintain itself and was still successful due to the trade in the Indian Ocean basin and Mediterranean. So just kind of think how trade played a large role in them being able to maintain their kingdom. So number 6, how did monsoons help lead to population growth? 7, how did Hindu temples affect the Indian economy? And then 8, how did the Indian Ocean basin promote commercial trade practices with Asia? And 9, even with no Christian influence around them, why do you think Axum was able to maintain Christianity in its realm? All right, so I just wanted to show you a map of the area that we're talking about so you familiarize yourself with it, because you will see this map on various tests moving forward. So this is India right here. This is the area we're talking about. And all these lines are the various trade routes that are occurring. So the Indian Ocean basin is this whole area right here. Okay, the whole area you see where the trade routes are happening. It's very important to note that this will be pretty much the commercial center for a really long time on this side of the world. Okay, on the Eastern Hemisphere. So here's India, and you're trading into Africa, you're trading into Southwest Asia, you're trading into Southeast Asia, you're even going as far along as into East Asia as well. So trade was very, very important in the Indian Ocean. So again, just keep the map in mind, and when you see this map, you should just think Indian Ocean trade. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is the production and trade in the Indian Ocean basin and how it really changed the caste society. So as you see a lot more merchants coming in, that's going to change the way the caste system is organized. And remember, the caste system is not this rigid, inflexible kind of social structure. Rather, it's very flexible, and it's going to adapt to the migrants that are coming in. You're still going to see the Jati, and remember, they're the subcasts that are those guilds that have that specialized labor. But they're also going to have political and economic influence because they're also the ones making a lot of money now. And then in terms of geography, north to south, you saw more commercial developments happen between each other because of these guilds, because of the Brahmins. So just keep in mind that the caste system, although it is a social structure, it was flexible enough to allow merchants to come in and adapt themselves to the caste society. The caste society adapt themselves to those merchants. So question 10, why do you think the caste system has been able to exist from its early development to the 12th century? So the next thing we're going to look at is the meeting of Hindu and Islamic traditions. So Buddhism will begin to go into decline due to external attacks in India. It's going to be really big, as we already know. We're going to see a lot of it in China. It's going to be very popular there, but it's going to lose some of its popularity in India. And Hinduism and Islam will probably be the two main religions that will thrive in India during this time. So some of the things that we see with Hinduism are devotional cults, particularly to Vishnu, who is the preserver of the world, and Shiva, who was considered the fertility and destructive god. So it's the idea that, they're offering salvation and Honored deities were associated with Vishnu and Shiva. So it was like these two were the main gods, and then you had kind of lower deities that you are connecting to these two main gods. And it was the hope that you were going to bring a more mystic union between yourself and the gods through these devotional cults. Shankara, this was a devotee of Shiva, and it was a philosophy. He had a philosophy that was based more on reason and metaphysics. So very similar to the Greek philosophical thought. That's really what he followed more of. So more of a rational sense. And then you kind of had on the other end, the opposite end, Ramanuja, and this was a devotee to Vishnu. And with Vishnu, and this devotee was more of a personal union with the deity. So as we see, Shankara was more about the metaphysical and the reasoning. Ramanuja was more about that personal spiritual connection. And he said that bliss came from salvation and your identification of your individual self with the gods, that connection, that spiritual connection with you and the gods. So that was really Hinduism and how they were able to spread and maintain itself in India. And then, like I said, we also had Islam and how it was appealing to some people. And you have to remember, this is the caste system in India. So a lot of people who are at the bottom of the caste system, they saw Islam as appealing because they felt that it was a way to escape the system and that in that way they could improve their position and escape discrimination. So probably a lot of people who are at the bottom did convert to Islam because of that reason. You also see the Sufis. Remember I told you in the last one, the last screencast, these are kind of like the hippies of the Islamic world, and they're not so big on necessarily like you have to practice Islam this specific way, you have to follow all these rules. They're more about getting converts. And they feel, you know what, if we can get you more on the personal and the emotional level, then that's better than getting you on the doctrinal level. Because it's not, for them, it was not all about the doctrine, it was that you believed in Allah. So this would help those find comfort and meaning because they didn't have to necessarily practice their doctrine in such a strict manner. You also saw something called the Bhakti movement, which was a combination of Hinduism and Islam. One of the leaders was Guru Kabir. And pretty much he said that Vishnu, Allah, and Shiva, these three main gods, that they're all one deity. And of course, this is going to appeal to many people who feel that, you know, it's a conflict of interest to, believe in one and then you're also Hindu and you don't believe in the others. All right, so question 11. What is more important, moving beyond reality or waiting to be saved? Sorry, waiting or wanting to be saved. And 12, what's more important, that you believe in a religion or you follow its doctrine? So now we're going to move on to the influence of Indian society in Southeast Asia. We're going to look at the state of Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia is familiar with the Hindu politics and traditions. Because of its location, because of where it's located, they already know a lot of Indian culture and Hindu culture, for that matter. So they will adopt a lot of it, especially in terms of political organizations. They'll adopt that idea of kingships, and they'll also adopt the religions and the faiths like Hinduism and Buddhism. Not to mention the literature, the cultural part. They will also follow the Ramayana and Mahabharata, which are the ones that talk about the Hindu values. One of the particular places that it talks about, the first empires, was Funan, and they will adopt Indian political, cultural, religious traditions as well. They'll be the first to do that, and they become very popular because they kind of serve as like a good commercial intermediary, middleman kind of, for India and East Asia. And then we also see the Srivijaya Empire come in, and they'll have a naval base and they will be very strong in terms of Buddhism. And then the other area it talks about is Angkor, and we will also see again Indian traditions, and this is pretty much a microcosm of the Hindu culture. They pretty much, I mean, even in their architecture, it's very, very similar to that of India and their Hindu culture. So again, remember that Islam, because it had influenced India, it makes sense that it would kind of, travel down into Southeast Asia as well. And you do see the arrival of Islam through the merchants that were there, and they attracted other elites and traders to Islam as well. Again, probably for commercial benefit. All right, it made sense. You're going to make more money that way. And Sufis would help with that conversion. Malacca was one of the main areas that followed Islam. In fact, they sponsored the faith, so it was a state-sponsored faith, and it welcomes the Sufis, the theologians, and the missionaries. Okay, so how did India affect the area of Southeast Asia, and how did Islam affect the area of Southeast Asia? All right, so again, just remember those big takeaways that the Indian Ocean Basin in particular, was a major trading center. Um, Everybody from all areas of the world in the Eastern Hemisphere came to trade there, from Africa, Southwest Asia, China, Southeast Asia. It was huge. And then also keep in mind the role that Islam played in influencing and affecting India and Southeast Asia as well.